The stage glowed under the usual wash of studio lights, warm and flattering, but there was something else hanging over the set tonight: restraint. Bill Maher wore the easy grin of a man about to lob a softball. Meghan Markle returned the smile, to the cameras, to the crowd, even to Bill. But tucked under that expression was a flicker of irritation, quick enough to disappear inside a single line. Bill seemed to register it, because tonight the topic wasn't crowns or titles. It was the thing people tweet about but rarely say out loud. And when Meghan's gaze slipped away from the lens for just a second, it became clear this wasn't going to be a routine late-night chat. The space looked like any high-end talk show set in America: polished surfaces, muted colors, a city skyline glowing behind glass, like a promise you're not sure you believe. Two chairs sat on a circular blue carpet, facing each other. No desk to shield anyone, no extra guests to diffuse the charge. Just two people, a measured distance apart, tethered by posture and the fragile etiquette of broadcast civility. Meghan sat with one leg crossed, back straight, hands loosely folded. She appeared calm, but it was the kind of calm that feels rehearsed rather than restful, the composure of someone who's learned to hold a pleasant expression because anything else becomes a headline. Bill sat opposite, slightly forward, fingers laced, the faint smirk of a lifelong commentator who treats the world like an ongoing setup, with himself as the one holding the mic. Applause thinned out. The upbeat theme music faded. For one brief beat, the room felt too quiet, not uncomfortable, charged. Bill didn't open with the obvious, and that was the first twist. "Meghan," he said, sounding almost relaxed, "appreciate you coming." She dipped her head. "Thank you for inviting me." The words were courteous, but her eyes stayed fixed, steady, as if she refused to be the first to look away. Bill's smile widened. "You're used to everyone having an opinion about you. You've turned into, what, a global projection screen? People look at you and see whatever they need to see." Meghan's lips tightened just a bit. "That's not unusual for women in public life." "No," Bill agreed, his tone softening briefly, "but in your case it went worldwide." Meghan held his stare. The camera caught the smallest tell, her fingers pressing together a little harder. Not jitters, control. Bill spoke like someone threading a path through breakable objects. "I'm not planning to spend the entire night rehashing royal family stuff. You've been through that mill. I get it." Her shoulders dropped by a fraction, like someone who braced for a hit that hadn't landed, yet. "But," Bill added, and the word hung there like a pin above a balloon, "I am curious about something else." Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Such as?" Bill opened his hands, palms up, a gesture that looked harmless. "This idea that our culture now is, how do I say it, hooked on storylines instead of circumstances, on narratives instead of basic facts." At the word narratives, Meghan didn't move, but everyone could feel her focus sharpen. "And," Bill continued, as if he'd just announced tonight's thesis, "you've become one of the most talked-about storylines of the last decade." Meghan smiled again, but it stayed on the surface. "That's an intense way to talk about a human being." Bill chuckled. "I'm not criticizing, I'm describing. You're a controversy people can put a face to." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Meghan didn't. She tipped her head slightly. "If I've become a storyline, it's because other people decided to write me into one." Bill's eyes gleamed. "Sure, but you also participate in telling that story. You shape it, you repeat it, you refine it." The warmth in the studio shifted a degree cooler, not dramatically, but noticeably. Meghan's voice stayed even. "I share what I've lived. If that unsettles people, that reaction is theirs to manage." Bill nodded slowly, as if he'd been waiting for something close to that answer. "Let's sit with that phrase, your version of events." Her jaw tightened once, a barely noticeable movement the cameras caught anyway, because cameras always zoom in on the smallest cracks. Bill leaned back, comfortable. "When you talk about your version of events, do you mean the reality as you experienced it, or the version that best supports how you want to be seen?" There it was, the first real needle, not a swing, not an insult, just a direct question, sharp enough to draw attention. Meghan blinked slowly, taking her time. On television, that extra half-second feels like a full minute. "I mean the reality I lived," she said at last, voice a shade cooler. "And it's telling that your first instinct is to frame it as self-justification." Bill's smile didn't waver. "I'm not framing, I'm clarifying." Her eyes flashed, quick, contained, gone. Sometimes clarifying is just a polite way of steering the narrative. A soft wave of ooze floated through the audience. Bill lifted one shoulder. Fair, but sometimes people call it steering only when they don't like where the question might go. Meghan didn't change position, but the air around her did. She leant forward slightly, closing the space between them by an inch. "Let's be clear," she said. "I didn't agree to be here as some kind of think piece on culture wars. I came to highlight my work." "And we will," Bill replied, "but your work and your personal story are fused. That's not my interpretation, that's how your public image is built." The word image landed with more weight than a neutral term should. It wasn't inherently negative, but in that moment it sounded like an accusation. "My image," Meghan repeated quietly. "Is that your word for social impact now?" Bill lifted a hand, steadying the energy that hadn't fully flared yet. "I'm not saying advocacy is branding. I'm saying in 2025, almost everything public gets branded, even good intentions." "That," Meghan answered, locking eyes with him, "is a very bleak way to look at people." Bill grinned. "I run a political comedy show. Skepticism kind of comes with the job description." Meghan exhaled sharply, nearly a laugh, but not quite. "And compassion doesn't?" Bill's brows rose. "Now we're getting interesting." She adjusted the cuff of her blouse, a small movement that felt like sliding on armor. Bill leaned in again, voice smooth and deceptively gentle. "Here's what puzzles me. You say you want privacy, but you produce content centered on your life. You say you want calm, but you wade into public disputes. You say you want to move forward, but you revisit the past on the biggest platforms in the world." Her expression held, but her eyes sharpened, catching the light like glass. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" he asked. "Turning a person into a contradiction so you can make a point." "Or," Bill countered, "I'm asking if it's contradiction or accountability." The crowd murmured. The tension wasn't theoretical anymore. Meghan leaned back slowly. The calm now looked less like ease and more like self-control. "Accountability for what?" she asked. "For speaking? For existing?" Bill's tone stayed level. "For repeatedly turning very real pain into a permanent public product." A hush swept the room, not total silence, but close. Meghan went very still. She didn't blink, and that's when the audience understood this wasn't going to be one of those segments where the guest smiles, promotes a project, and leaves to polite applause. Bill hadn't shouted, he hadn't called her names, he'd just dropped a sentence that forced a decision. Meghan could sidestep, or she could push back directly. She chose something else, calm, precise, and far more dangerous. She smiled. "Bill," she said softly, "you're very at ease describing a woman processing trauma as if she's cashing in on complaints." His smile thinned. "I'm very willing to say that anyone, man or woman, who turns their hardest experiences into recurring content is running a business around it." Meghan held the smile one beat too long. Then she looked past him, at the skyline backing, at the lights, at the lenses trained on them. For the first time, her voice carried a hint of unpolished. "Then maybe you should ask why people like you keep consuming that content so eagerly." Bill's eyes flickered. Not anger, not fear, interest. The look of a chess player who'd just watched the board shift into a more volatile game. "Okay," he said quietly, "let's talk about who's consuming what." The moment Bill said, "Let's talk about who's consuming what," the studio seemed to cool by a degree, not enough to see, but enough to feel. Even the shimmering skyline behind them suddenly looked harsher, less romantic. Meghan didn't answer right away. The silence didn't feel like uncertainty, it felt like strategy.
She uncrossed and recrossed her legs more slowly, reclaiming space. When she finally spoke, her tone was gentle but edged with steel. You keep circling back to words like selling and buying, as if telling your own story automatically makes it cheap. Bill nodded once, eyes firmly on her. Not automatically, but when it happens often enough, it becomes a pattern people notice. A ripple moved through the crowd, not laughter, not clapping, awareness. Meghan's lips curled slightly. Curious, when men write books about their lives, they're called courageous. When women speak openly, suddenly it's a business plan. Bill didn't rush to respond. He leaned back, crossed an ankle and waited. That pause made her words echo louder. I stepped away from an institution that rewards silence. I chose to be open, and somehow that's turned into a moral flaw. No one said moral flaw, Bill replied, a short breath of a laugh escaping. I said it's a repeated choice. Repeated choices exist.
Meghan unclenched her fingers one by one. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You think this makes you brave," she said, "but you're just one more man dismissing a woman because she refuses to be quiet about what hurt her." "And you," Bill replied without missing a beat, "are one more powerful person treating firm questioning like an assault." The room felt like it might split down the middle. "You brought me here to embarrass me," Meghan said, breathing noticeably faster. "No," Bill answered, "I brought you here to discuss things honestly." She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "This isn't discussion, it's a setup." "Only," Bill said, leaning back, "if you thought honesty meant automatic applause." That line hung in the air like smoke. Meghan glanced down for an instant, then back up, eyes blazing. "You know what?" she said. "I don't have to sit through this." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Sit through what exactly?" "This staged exercise," she replied, "where you pretend to be neutral while turning every question into a blade." Bill's voice softened, calm, not contrite. "If questions feel like blades, perhaps the story you're telling is thinner than you think." Meghan inhaled sharply. Her leg bounced once, betraying the steady posture she'd worked to maintain. The tension was no longer simmering, it was boiling. And as the red light above the main camera glowed, relentless, everyone in that room understood one thing. This had stopped being a conversation about ideas. It had become a test of stamina. Sooner or later, one of them was going to get up. The quiet after Bill's last remark wasn't empty. It was crowded, with unsaid comebacks, with camera operators ready to zoom in, with producers silently debating whether to cut to break. Neither Meghan nor Bill moved. The skyline behind them shone like a silent witness that had seen these showdowns before and knew they rarely ended clean. Bill finally broke the silence, not with another jab, but with something that sounded like an attempt at control. "Let's take a breath," he said evenly. "This doesn't have to stay in attack mode." Meghan let out a small laugh under her breath. "We crossed that line about 10 minutes ago." "Fair," Bill said with a short nod. "So let's at least be direct." Her eyes lifted. "By all means." He leaned forward again, elbows light on his knees, voice precise. "You say you want to be heard. I believe that. But you also seem to want to dictate what kind of questions you'll tolerate. Those two things don't easily coexist." Her fingers tightened together. "I want basic respect." "Respect," Bill replied, "doesn't mean being insulated from uncomfortable questions." The audience murmured again, just enough to register. Meghan turned slightly, angling her body away from him, a subtle repositioning. "You're painting this as if I walked in demanding compliments. I didn't. I came to talk about how public pressure and harassment impact mental health." "And after that," Bill said, "you partnered with companies to produce content about that pressure." "There it is," she said, head snapping back toward him, again with the business angle. "Because it matters," he countered. "If you're positioning yourself as a leading voice on an issue, people will absolutely scrutinize the financial ecosystem around that voice." "So compassion now comes with a disclaimer?"
No, Bill said calmly. Influence does. You're obsessed with power, she replied quietly. I'm interested in power, he corrected, especially when it presents itself as powerless. That line cut deep. The audience reacted. Meghan reacted more. You have no idea what it's like, she said, voice rising, to have every sentence torn apart, every photo twisted, every moment with your children dissected. I don't claim I do, Bill answered. I know what it's like to be criticized. It's not identical, but it's not nothing. It is nothing compared to being chased, hounded, dehumanized, Meghan shot back. Bill lifted a finger slightly, more for emphasis than accusation. No, it isn't the same, just like being a duchess isn't the same as being an ordinary target. A quiet ripple of shock went through the crowd. You don't get to drop my former title like a joke, Meghan said, eyes darkening. Then don't use it as part of your protection when it suits you. Another warning came through his earpiece. Careful, but the momentum was already in motion. Meghan leaned forward, both hands on her knees now. You really think I enjoy any of this? I think, said Bill, you've adapted to it very effectively. You're reducing my entire existence to optics, she said, her voice low and firm. I'm responding to the version you present publicly, he answered just as softly. The crowd shifted again. Someone whispered, Wow. Another laughed nervously, then went quiet. Meghan straightened, smoothing the front of her jacket with slow precision. Let me ask you something, Bill. He nodded. Go ahead. Do you believe people should stay silent when powerful institutions cause them harm? No, he answered immediately. Then why am I vilified for speaking? She pressed. You're not vilified, Bill said. You're challenged when that speaking also becomes a major brand. So the rule is talk, but don't let your work succeed, she shot back. The rule is, he replied, speak freely, but don't treat success as proof that your version of events is beyond question. That stung. Meghan's breathing quickened. She tried to soften it with a smile, but it came off brittle. You're projecting, she said. You're angry that I don't play by the old media rules. I'm frustrated, Bill answered, by anyone who changes the rules mid-game and expects nothing but praise for it. The audience reacted again, split this time. Some applauded, others stayed stiff. Meghan gestured lightly toward the crowd. Listen to that, she said. This is what happens when nuance gets drowned out by cynicism. Bill followed her gesture, then looked back at her. And this is what happens when criticism gets rebranded as cruelty. She scoffed. You call this criticism? Yes, Bill responded simply. Meghan turned her head, disbelief carved into her features. You've spent the last 20 minutes questioning my integrity. I've questioned the framing, he said calmly, not whether you've experienced pain. That's a word game, she snapped. Just like my truth is a word game, Bill replied, the faintest suggestion of a smirk returning. That did it. Her composure bent, if not broke. You don't get to mock the language people use to explain why they're still here, she said, voice rising slightly. People cling to those words to make sense of what happened to them. I'm not making fun of survival, Bill said, leaning back, hands open. I'm pushing back on the holier-than-thou attitude that can grow around it. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Meghan's eyes glistened, not from tears but from anger. You really think you're above this? She said. I think, he answered very softly, I care more about being truthful than being liked. That line coaxed a louder laugh from the audience. Meghan heard it. Something in her expression hardened. You invited me, she said slowly, not to listen, but to provoke. You invited me, he replied, to respond. On your terms, she shot back. On reality's terms, he answered. She leaned back and now fully crossed her arms, not just for posture, but for protection. Do you want to know what your problem is? He waited. Go on. You confuse distance with wisdom, she said. And you, Bill replied evenly, confuse intensity with proof. The words hung between them like a stone no one wanted to touch. Meghan exhaled through her nose, darting a glance at the cameras before meeting his eyes again. "This is exactly why people don't trust men like you," she said. "You dissect other people's pain like it's an academic exercise you'll never have to feel." "And this," Bill replied, unyielding, "is why people question figures like you. You speak about pain, but the story rarely seems to move past it." A few scattered gasps broke the quiet. Meghan's hands dropped to her sides, her shoulders squared. "That's enough," she said. "Enough of what?" Bill asked. "Enough of this," she said, "this condescending tone dressed up in curiosity." "If that's truly how you feel," Bill said slowly, "we can shift topics." She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You don't get to escalate the damage and then act like the peacemaker." "Then tell me," Bill said, leaning in again, "what do you actually want right now?" She stared at him for a beat. Then, "I want accountability." "From whom?" he asked. "From people who build careers tearing others apart," she answered without hesitation. "Including yourself?" he asked, just as fast. The room froze. Meghan's mouth opened, then closed. Her chest rose and fell more visibly. She looked away, just for a second. When she faced him again, something had shifted behind her eyes. This was no longer about trading lines. It was about deciding whether to stay. "You know what?" she said, half rising. Her chair scraped audibly against the floor. Bill stayed where he was. He didn't look shocked. He watched her like someone who'd seen the storm rolling in from far off and knew it would eventually reach the building. "This is what I'm talking about," Bill said, voice calm, tinged with something like sadness. "The moment the questions stop feeling flattering, you walk out." Meghan turned back slowly. The practiced smile was gone. What remained was bare. "You haven't been asking questions,"